Well, hello, cupcakes and princesses, and I'll let you decide which category that you think you fall into yourself. My name is John, and in this video, you will learn how to create a content app inside of Umbraco version number 9. Now, this isn't going to be any bog standard content app. This is going to be a fairly complicated one, which will allow us to look at some interesting topics within Umbraco, so there's a lot to learn. Now, in case you're not aware, a content app is basically a custom screen that we can apply on a per pages basis inside of the CMS. So basically, when a content editor logs in, clicks on a page within the content tree, what they'll see is a custom tab, and in that custom tab, we're going to display some stuff. Now, the content app we're going to be creating today is basically going to render a persistent URL. So regardless if that content item is being published or not published, we're going to have a URL. Now, this might sound trivial, however, getting the URL for unpublished pages in Umbraco is definitely not straightforward. So we're going to go into like iPublished, iContent differences, why we don't have a URL and what you can do about it. Now, the content app we're going to be creating today is going to be powered by the might of C#. Screw all this Angular malarkey. Now, actually, if you go online and try and find how to do this, there isn't that many tutorials, / I haven't found one yet. So what we'll be doing is creating a controller with our content app. We'll be passing information into that controller, so there's a bit custom routing, which means that we'll be able to actually get information and context about the current page we're visiting within the backend. So as I said, there's loads of really useful stuff here. I think there's going to be a lot for you to learn. I'm super excited about it. I think it's going to be a very exciting video. Now, if you haven't come across one of my videos before, we are in the middle of a series about Umbraco v9 development. So if you want to be an absolute legend, then you know what to do. You should smash the subscribe button. Smashing the subscribe button is the easiest way for everyone in this channel to think of you as a good person. And if you don't, we will all boo and hiss you. Seriously though, if you actually like this kind of content, I do weekly YouTube videos on Umbraco, CMS, basically videos which help you become the best developer you can be. So if you like all that stuff, smash subscribe, you won't regret it, I promise, pinky swear. So, assuming you've done that, let's have a look at this content app in action and see what we're going to be building. A content app is going to allow you as a developer to add extra contextual information on a per page basis within the CMS. So to make sure that we're on the same page, let's have a look at it all in actions. So I've got the custom content app we'll be creating today installed on this website. So basically we can click on any page. On the top right hand side, we're going to see a tab. Our tab is going to be called links. Clicking on links is going to open up our custom content app. So the app is going to display a few things: the publish status, the URL of the current page. It's going to provide a capability to click on a copy URL button, which is going to give us the URL. We can also then click on the bit.ly button, which is going to call the bit.ly API, create a shortcode for us. We've also got that copy to clipboard ability, paste in a shortcut, boom, redirected to the home page. Now, this might seem like a really intuitive sort of feature, and you might expect it to come out of the box with Umbraco. However, this is where, this is one of the areas I'd say that Umbraco is a bit weak. When it comes to content scheduling and planning, there's a lot to be improved. And I think for me, this is a very valid use case. So when I'm doing my videos, what you'll notice is that on a weekly basis, I also have these related tutorials. Now, I record my videos, say, a month in advance, and I also publish the blog posts that go along with it on the same day. So this means that when I'm trying to generate this link, when I'm creating the description in now for a month's time, the process I have to go through is go into the CMS, publish something. So I need to move this to the left so you can see it. So I need to go through this process, publish it before it's ready. Then what will happen is the URL in here will get generated. Then I'll quickly copy that URL. Then I have to go back in here, click on publish, and then off we go. So obviously that workflow is not ideal. When you're doing lots of content, it's very annoying. Now, one of the things we need to point out, and the reason why this isn't trivial, is that when we've published a URL, you can see that this links section within the info tab is populated. So clicking on it opens the homepage. Now, if I go to the info tab for something which hasn't been published, you can see this item is not published. So this is going to create us a little bit dilemma. So when we're creating this app, we need to think about published content and unpublished content. So let's have a look at how we can build it. Before we get into the nitty gritty, it's worth pointing out that all the codes you're about to see in this video is available from my starter kit. So if you want a quick way to access everything, head over to the GitHubs. It's John D. Jones. Pinned right on the start page is the Umbraco V9 starter kit. If you want to be an absolute ledge, follow me. But yeah, clone it. It's going to be much easier than copying things off the screen. The first thing we need to do is register a content app so then we can have our custom screen appear in the CMS. After we do that, we then need a way to get the information about the current page and then pass that into a controller. Now, in order to create a content app, I've created a new folder here. You create a new class, call it whatever you want. The important thing about this class is that you implement from the ContentApp factory. Now, when you do this, you're going to have to implement the public content app get content app for, which takes in an object source and an IEnumerable read-only user group. And basically in here, we need to register a content app. And this is the thing which is going to allow the tab to appear within the backend. So the first thing we want to do is check that the item is a content item. So for whatever reason, for safety, we don't want this breaking. We don't want this to be available for things like members, that kind of stuff. So check that it's of type iContent. Now, if it is, you want to return a content app, and the properties that you need to specify are the alias. So this could be anything you want. This is just a backend reference. Content editors aren't going to see it. You also need to set the name. So this is the thing that content editors will see. And as you saw for the example, that's where the text links come from. We also want to specify the icon. So I'm using a icon cloud. I'll link in the description how to actually access all the different icons. There's a few of them. Now, the next thing we need to do is call our custom view. Now, I've gone through controllers and I've gone through routing many times in this series, so I'm going to assume that most of you have a basic understanding. Now, the controller we're going to call in this instance is going to be a vanilla MVC controller, and it's going to be called additional links controller. So going back to our content app, how we actually route our request to that controller is first we need to make sure it's secure. So we can do this by using the Umbraco backoffice plugins prefix. So this thing here needs to be added. Otherwise, anyone from the whole of the world might be able to see our view. Next, we want to then call our controller. So I've created a custom routing rule, but my controller is basically called ContentApp, and I've added in this links just for shits and giggles, just to make it stand out a little bit more. And then at the end, you can see that I'm passing in this content ID. And this bit is key, and I haven't seen this anywhere else online. But yeah, if you want to get content or context, should I say, within that vanilla controller that we're about to create, then you need to pass in the page ID from the content app into that controller. So because we're typing everything within our content app here, we know that it's iContent, and we can simply pass in the ID. So this is really key. Without doing this, you won't know what page you're actually looking at within the code in the backend. Now, in order to make all of this work within Umbraco and without it doing a 404 error, you're going to have to put a custom rule within the routing table. So basically this thing here, we're going to have to add in the routes table. Now, I've covered this in multiple videos, but the rule that we're going to create looks something like this. So we give it a name, content app, can be anything you want. We're going to mirror that URL that we just saw, and then we're going to use the controller called content links, the action called index, and then it's also got the ID parameter. So this can be an optional one, so it's URL parameter option, but notice here how we're passing it in. So basically that's how we're going to create a C# content app, is that we register it, and then we're going to basically pass everything to a controller. Once we're in that controller, we're good. We can just do normal MVC stuff, and we don't need to worry about content app specific things anymore. So after we've got all of this stuff, the final thing you need to do is register it. So when you're creating these different types of content apps, you'll need to register it. So as you can see, to do that, we create a composer. When you're doing composer, you need to implement this public void compose Umbraco builder. And this is going to pass you this builder object. And with the builder object, you just do builder.contentapps append, and you pass in that custom type you just created. So basically, yeah, creating this registration, creating that content app, and then creating that routing rule is pretty much the main key of getting it working with the C#. So once we've done all of that, the great thing is that we can then start just concentrating on our controller, and we're back to normal MVC. So as you can see within my class library, I've got a folder called controller, and it's called vanilla, and in here I've got additional links controller. Now this is just the standard MVC controller, just to point that out again. And let's have a look at what happens. So things get a little bit more complicated and a little bit gnarly here. So obviously, let's go through the happy path. Let's assume that our content has been published first. So what we'll do within our published content is use this parameter I've defined here. We're doing get by ID. Then if the value has it's been published and it exists in the front end cache, we can simply just call item.url, pass in null for the culture code. So if you're using multi-language, you might want to pass this in. If you're just using the default language, you can use null, and then url mode.absolute is going to get you the front path. So in this example, it's http localhost :1863, whatever it is. So as you can see, the happy path, getting a URL, super simple. Now let's have a look at the unhappy path. So what happens when our page has not been published yet? So when it comes to Umbraco and accessing these published and non-published items, we've basically got two different APIs. So using the API for the front end cache, gone over it many times, we can use the Umbraco context accessor. So this is going to give us access to the front end cache. If you want to get information about pages that have yet to be published, then you'll have to use the content service. So that's the reason why we're passing these two things in here. We'll come back to the other one in a bit. Now let's ignore this bitly bit. So the first thing we're doing is, we've got that code. It's calling the front end cache by ID. If the item is not in the front end cache, we're going to have to build up the URL ourselves. So the first thing I'm doing is defining a string builder, and then we're calling the content service getting by ID. Now what we need to do now is somehow figure out the URL for this item, and unfortunately, Umbraco doesn't give us a way, so you're going to have to figure it out yourself. So the way that I've done it, and there's a method below as well if you want to use that one, is that we get the page from the database. From this page, we're then going to get the parent ID. So in this example, we're always going to assume that the parent has been published. So getting the parent item, which has been published, allows us to then do parent item.url. We can do the same trick as we did before, so pass in null for the culture code, and then URL mode equal absolute. So basically this is going to give us the complete URL for the URL structure below our current page. Now the only thing we need to do is get the URL segment for the current item. Now again, this isn't the easiest thing to do in the world, and it's not very intuitive. So what we can do is get a preview example of our item. Now the preview example will actually give us the URL segment. So using the data from the front end published cache, so you can see here we're using that Umbraco context accessor this time rather than the content service. What we can do is get by ID, pass in true first, and passing in true here basically means we want to get the data in preview mode, and then pass in the ID. So this is going to give us a preview version of the item, and then it's a simple case of appending the parent URL with the URL segment from the preview item. As I said, this is probably a little bit more complicated than you probably thought it might be, but you kind of get the gist, is that you need to try and figure out the URL somehow. Now there is an alternative way of doing it, which isn't as good, but for understanding and teaching and learning about Umbraco, it's worth going over. So the additional way of doing it is that when you call an item from iContent, it's going to have a path. So if I close this down and annoyingly reopen it, what happens is that when you call that item, the path is going to have a comma separate list from all the items from the current page back to root. So it's going to have, the parent page, going to have the home page. It's also going to have the root node page. So if I open up the CMS, let's go to my content app. What should hopefully happen? Perfect. We've triggered off here. And then if I go to my publish path bit of code down the bottom here, so skip through this bit. Boo. We need to go to a page that hasn't been published, obviously. So let's go to this page here. Fire up our content app. Now we're into the item which hasn't been published. We've now got the published item. So if we go to the path property down here, what we'll see is that our path is very small. You probably can't see that. The data is -1-1197, 1199, 1200. So what we can do is a path.split. Then what we'll do is iterate up the tree. Basically, if we're saying the segment doesn't exist because we're using the front-end cache here. So I'll say that again, probably I think it makes more sense. What we're doing is doing the splits, then we're going to reverse order. Now, if the item is the root node or the home page, we don't want to get that involved within our iteration. So I've got this segment equals null, which means it's the root node, or segment level equals 1, which means it's the home page. So yeah, we can then iterate back through this path, build up that URL segment, and then we can do exactly the same thing, get that preview URL for the current URL segment, and then combine them all together. So as you can see, it's a bit of a faff to do this. However, using the technique above, as you can see, is much easier. It's a lot less code, there's a lot less iteration, it's a lot quicker. So yeah, just use the parent ID. But the general thing here is, as soon as we've got this data, we can then display stuff on our page. Boom, carry on. So there we have it. Now, looking at our controller, we've got our data, and then we're passing all of our view model that we're creating into a view. And the view is just very standard. We can go to my view folder. You can see that I've got a folder called additional links. In here, we've got the index CHHTMLs. And this file is quite big. Basically, we're going to say that we're passing in our view model. We don't want to use a layout, so we can create our own custom one. In here, you're just basically going to create a complete HTML document. Now, I've got some JavaScript functions here, which I'll cover quickly. But all we're basically doing is rendering out those links. Job done. So we know now how to create a content app just using C#, and we know how to get the URL for unpublished items. Let's look at the last bit quickly of how we can get information from Bitly. Was the ability to take that URL, regardless if it's been published or non-published, fire it over to Bitly and then get a shortened URL. Now, if you haven't come across Bitly before, I recommend you check it out. Now, it has two really nice capabilities for me. Now, the first one is you basically can create a shortened URL. So as you saw earlier, and this example here, passing in any of your website URLs, it will give you the shortcut code. And as you can see above it, it will also give you analytics. So you can actually track, which is your most popular links, who's been clicking on what, and from where, all that kind of stuff. The best thing is, it's free up to 1,000 links per month. So if you've got a fairly low traffic website, or even if you have a lot of traffic, but you don't expect to have that many clicks, this is perfect for you, and it's much better than embedding normal links. Now, in order to query Bitly, we'll need to use the API. And at the time of recording, we'll be calling the version 4.0 API. And as you can see from the payload that we need to send Bitly, we basically need to get an authorization token. We need to set it as application.json, and then we pass in the long URL. So this will be the URL from your page, that URL we just generated, and then a few other bits and bobs. Now, one thing you need is that security token. And if you want to create the security token inside of the Bitly, basically in your profile, go to settings, there's a bit in there which says generate API key. I will not click on it, otherwise you'll be able to see my key, and I'm not that silly. Now, because I'm hosting my repo in a public forum, I don't want to share my key to the world. So this is the reason why in my architecture, I've added my Bitly key into my settings page inside of the CMS. So as you can see here, if we go to settings, I've got this option called Bitly key. And then if I hadn't commented it out, the key would exist there. But basically when we're going through this code, this is how I'm getting that API key, and you've seen how we've generated it in Bitly. So going back to our code bases, we can now see that I've got my additional link service. I'm now calling basically an API to get that settings page and to get that Bitly key. Then I'm adding it to the view model, and I'm passing that view model down into that view. So backend wise, all you really need to do is get access to that key and pass it down. Now within the actual code, what we can do is define some of the CSS, and actually I'll quickly talk about this. So when you're styling up your pages, as you can see here, I've got these classes like unbox, unbox header, unbox form, unbox content. Now, when you're creating your custom form, if you want to make sure that it looks exactly like it should do, the simple way is, go to index or info or one of these tabs, do a right click, do an inspect, pick the element that you want, do an edit source or edit as HTML, copy and paste and strip out the bits. It's a bit long-winded. Again, check out the sample site so you can copy and paste the classes you need. However, that is how I generated all the HTML skeleton that you're seeing within this tutorials. So basically we've got this button right here, which is on click, get this short URL. And as you can see, I'm passing in the Bitly API key that we passed down from the controller. Now within this function, it's not too difficult. We're basically going to create this params. We're going to set in that long URL that we saw. Then we're going to call the Bitly service. We're going to call the shorten method. We're going to make sure it's JSON. It's going to be a post request. And then we're just going to set the authorization header. So we're going to put that bearer token and pass in the API key. So remember when we looked at Bitly, there we go. We're basically doing this line here, there, bearer token. So you need to pass that in. Otherwise, it's not going to work and you're going to get an exception. So then after we've got that, we then call in our params, we get some data, and then it's just simply a case of getting the data out of Bitly, which we're going to be in data.link, and then using some vanilla JavaScript, doing some get element by IDs, setting the visibility, and then off we go. So that's pretty it. Getting everything from Bitly is really easy. If you want to know how to do the copying of the text into the clipboard, the best way of doing it that I found online is basically navigator and navigator.clipboard and navigator clipboard write text. To be fair, we can make that a little bit easier. And then navigator.clipboard write text file, document.get element ID, and then the inner HTML. So yeah, all the JavaScript around here is not complicated. Getting the Bitly API, again, you can just copy this Ajax method here. It is using the jQuery. It's the first time I used jQuery for a while. But as you can see, it's nothing too scary. And now we have this absolute kick-ass content app, which is going to make our content editors' lives that much more sweeter. Ta-da! We have made it to the end. And as you can see, content apps can be really beneficial to make content lives easier when they're using the CMS. Now, if you haven't come across content apps before, I recommend you go to the marketplace. There's some pretty cool free ones that you can install. There's ones for doing things like adding Google Analytics on a per page basis. So yeah, go and check it out. Now, the one that we just created, I think is fairly complicated, and it's probably one of the more complicated videos that we've done in this series. And if I'm honest, when I thought about doing this originally, I wasn't sure I was going to have enough content to last this long. But yeah, things like creating URLs unfortunately isn't standard. It would be nice in terms of like marketing and content orchestration if Umbraco had much better features for content editors when they're trying to schedule things. However, this is the area where you're going to have to do some custom development, and it is what it is. So if you have found some value and you've enjoyed this content app, please let me know by hitting the like button. Like basically tells me that you want me to do more Umbraco content. Also helps the YouTube algorithm gods to show my video to more people. And if you made it this far and you like this content and you haven't taken the advice at the beginning of the video, what are you playing at, you little scamp? Hit the subscribe button. I should also say now that my book is available to purchase. So it's on Umbraco V9. Chapter 1 is complete, you can download it now. It's all about 50 pages long, and it'll tell you how to get up and running, get things running in Docker, all of that beautiful stuff. There will be weekly updates moving forward until it's finished. So if you want to support me and you enjoy this channel, that is one way that you can support me and keep me motivated writing. So I'm hoping you've got a lot of value from this video. Hope you've had a good time watching this, and until next time, happy coding.